like our pages. The audio phone numbers are on the homepage of our website at www.q95da.com. Get the latest breaking news and reviews on Q because you know it's true if you hear it on Q. We continue to revive the spirit of graciousness, of love and peace and prosperity and unity among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. Tonight, we're joined by three distinguished guests, Dr. Irving Andre, Mr. Simeon Joseph, and Senator Delbert Paris. It's our 10th Global View on Q for 2024, and we're going to have a great conversation tonight with you, our Q family listeners and friends of Dominica Worldwide and on live radio. A very, very warm welcome indeed to all of my distinguished guests. We're going to do things a little differently tonight. We're going to have each of our guests do a very brief introduction, into 4 or 5 minute presentations. And so we're hoping to have a lot of interaction among ourselves in the conversation and also to engage our guests, our Q family listeners at home in the region and worldwide in brief conversations with us as well. So we hope it'll be very interactive tonight. So I will put out a few talking points as we start, but I will leave the substantive details of these and the rest of the talking points to you, my learned colleagues on the panel tonight, and you, our callers and viewers. We will take a look at the actual reason for the lack of development in Dominica over the past 24 years, after having collected several billions of dollars from the international community, from the CBI program. In sharp comparison to previous regimes, previous administrations in Dominica and to other Caribbean countries that are doing much, much better in the same environment, the very same type of environment and circumstances within which we are operating. We'll examine the real reason for the delay in securing electoral and campaign finance reforms. 15 years after Attorney Anthony Astafan's email addressed to Mr. Skerritt and to Mr. Alec Lawrence dated Thursday, March 27, 2008. 15 years later, we still don't have the electoral campaign finance reforms. But we are Antigua that has done this so quickly, talking about doing campaign finance reforms again, modernizing, bringing up to date. So it appears that we must all scale that mountain of unity in order to see the promised land of democracy on the other side, by joining with the Electoral Reform Coalition and taking action as one. Electoral reform is obviously one major hurdle to national freedom, and the ERC seems to be the best vehicle at this time to be used to accomplish that goal. Many of the view that an elite clique is simply looting our country, now that we have been told that there may be no more CBI funds available for Dominica. What is the objective of the CBI model and program in the first place? Has that been served? Has it served that purpose? And what is its current status and its role in the development of Dominica and improving the lives of Dominicans? Somebody's mic is open. I hope we can close it down so we don't get that feedback. So how will the airport and geothermal energy projects, be completed without those CBI funds? Hope my guests will be able to help me out with that. And has Dominica been divided down to the bone, as one of my friends would ask, while looters steal the grain in the granary and the cost of living continues to kill our people? Dominicans must now stop the rape and plunder of Dominica's wealth and decide once and for all on what we must all do together to take back our country. Is another historical 47 days national strike what it will take to secure the change of governance that is critically needed to fix Dominica now? I have a number of other talking points, but I will leave them for now until later on when I introduce them, and of course, when my distinguished guests begin to make their presentations. So tonight, I trust that you, my distinguished guest, Dr. Andre, Simeon Joseph, and Senator Delbert Paris, I hope that you will make some of the suggestions as to where Dominica should go from here to see Dominicans prosper, rather than continue to see more land grabbing by foreign nationals, millions of dollars being sent out of the country by foreign contractors and workers, while Dominican entrepreneurs and our very talented youth are being displaced and are losing their heritage as they stand aside and look at money simply passing them by and going away. Why must our local banks provide a guarantee for millions of dollars for a wealthy US firm to build a geothermal energy project that may not necessarily be feasible or sustainable? It is imperative that we embrace national unity now, all hands on the same deck to secure good, caring governance in our nature isle and enable us to make ourselves truly economically independent after 45 years of self rule. We see escalating crime and economic devastation. It is high time for a change in governance. It is high time. I've been saying so for years now, which is standard practice in every other jurisdiction in real democracies. Dominicans are now really feeling a painful pinch in their pockets and they're beginning to respond to that. My distinguished guests, Dr. Andre, Mr. Simeon Joseph, Senator Delbert Paris, and you, our cherished listeners, viewers, and callers, will make the case for the mobilization of Dominicans throughout the length and breadth of Dominica and globally, with multitudes of strong, crystal clear voices exercising people's power and demanding that their rights be respected and restored. This now appears to be the only way to bring back good governance, fix the economy, restore respect to Dominica's devastated international image and reputation that was caused by corrupt passport transactions and major due diligence failures. So we invite you, our Q family friends of Dominica, to stay with us on our radio and television frequencies in Dominica, on our live stream on the internet, www.q95da.com, Facebook and YouTube platforms. And have your say as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G, on the Global View on Q, only on Q95, the big station. So our usual huge shout out and hugs and love and appreciation. And a big thank you to our healthcare providers, our frontline workers, police and fire officers, our teachers, our doctors, our cherished nurses, and public and private sector patriots at home and abroad. We welcome every Dominican and friend of Dominica to the Global View on Q. We embrace you wherever you are tonight, in every nook and cranny, in every village, every community at home in Dominica, in the region and globally. Thank you, Sherwin, keeping us on the air. Thank you so much, Lambi, on the console directing the telephone calls traffic. We will take your calls a bit later. The people's voice is always a priority on the Global View on Q. So call us anytime during the program, and Lambi will take your calls. He will signal us whenever you call. Let's get started. You have the first word in getting the ball rolling in our conversation tonight, Dr. Andrew, with your brief opening presentation. And then let's have a great Dominican family conversation and engagement tonight about taking meaningful actions now for the future of our beloved homeland and the future of the upcoming young generations. And I'll circle back to you for your opening remarks, Dr. Andre.
Let me say good evening to our panelists, Mr. Joseph, Mr. Paris, Lambi, Shumin in the back, certainly Mr. G, your listeners. This is the season of the Lenten season. So as we muse about the fate of Dominica, we have to keep any biblical inspiration in mind to help us go with the next level. In 2008, you've alluded to it, Mr. G, a senior lawyer forced a crown of thorns down the head of democracy in Dominica. And we have felt the effects of that crucifixion over the last 3 or 4 electoral cycles. The results were stolen because Dominicans abroad were allowed to come to vote in clear and fundamental violation of Dominica's electoral laws as they now exist. And we are reaping the bitter harvest. If we're talking about what happened to the CBI funds today, it is because of that betrayal. And let me just say very quickly, the suggestion that there are no funds available, again, is another concoction. It's another fraud perpetrated on the Dominican people. There are 3 pieces of evidence to confirm what we know has happened. 1, an admission by the Prime Minister a few years ago with respect to the $1.2 billion, which was diverted from the Consolidated Fund. 2, a lawsuit by a passport seller launched in New York, which talked about the millions of CBI funds which were diverted to mysterious accounts in Europe. And three, the anecdotal evidence, the newfound wealth of many of these passport sellers buying property left and right in Dominica, while Dominicans cannot even fix their roofs. That is the bitter fruit that we are reaping today, and we will continue to reap if we don't join forces to rid ourselves of this incubus, which is sucking the blood of Dominica. Thank you.
And thanks a lot for these brief opening remarks here, Dr. Andre. I know you're going to come back in the second round here to expand on some of those thoughts and to add some more meat to some of that bone there. I just want to go ahead to Senator Delbert Paris to make his brief opening remarks. Senator Paris, how are you doing?
Good evening, Mr. G.
Good to see you.
Evening to the rest of the panelists.
Good to see you.
It's nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's my debut on the Global View on Q. Before I start, I would like to send some greetings to the people of Marigot and Concord. I know that you have some very ardent listeners out there who are always tuning into Q95, and particularly this show where a lot of information comes out and people can actually gain some knowledge and some insight and participate in the conversation as it relates to the forward movement of their country. So I'd like to say special good evening to the people of Dominica, but particularly the people of Marigot and Concord and everybody in Wales. Good evening, good evening. And Mr. G, it's a pleasure to be here. I like being able to add my voice to the conversation. Some people still, in certain areas of the world, I'm still considered to be a youth. We're not going to get into all of that now, but I claim that. and I would like to be the one, or at least one of the voices that represent the young people in Dominica. I've had the opportunity to do that in and outside of Dominica throughout my lifetime, my short lifetime. And I would like to continue, because the important thing is that if you don't have young people who are growing and thriving and find hope living and working in the country of their birth and in the country where they live, your country, your economy is doomed to fail. There's no hope without a thriving youth society. And Dominica, that is what I would like to focus on, because Mr. G, sad to say, and I mean with all due respect to everyone on the panel, most of you are on your way out. I see Lambi in the studio and he's sporting a very healthy silver beard. It's an indication of wisdom, but also that he is ready to pass the baton on to somebody that probably would have no problem staying in the studios until midnight. But Mr. G, for you to be able to pass the baton on, and I know Mr. Joseph in his day has coached and educated many a young people, some of who are in leadership today in different parts of the world. Same, I suspect, as Dr. Andre. If you don't have young people to pass these things on to, it makes your life difficult, because it means that you have to hold on a little longer. In Dominica, I think we can do more to encourage our young people to get involved in a meaningful and in a sustainable way in the country's development, so that 20, 30, 40 years from now, Dominica will still be a place worth calling home.
And Senator Delbert Paris, you're so right. But I think when you made the remark a while ago about passing on the buck, I've already passed it, but you can't say the same thing to young people like Dr. Andre and Simeon Joseph. These people are youth. They're not ready to do that yet. As a matter
of with all respect.
Anyway, it's all good. Simeon, how you doing? You're muted. You're muted, Simeon. You need to unmute your mic. Okay, Simeon. It looks like Simeon is not hearing me because his mic is muted and he's not hearing me. So I may have to send a message to Simeon, and so I'll have to go back to Dr. Andre. so we can keep. Can I get a message to Simeon so he can unmute his mic? So, Dr. Andre, let's get going with all of this. I mean, to me, this thing is getting serious now, and it's time to do something about it. When I listen to our leader say no, that there are no more funds, when we know from the calculation there's supposed to be billions of dollars out there, when we know from our calculation that billions of dollars have passed through this country, through thick and thin. I mean, the Prime Minister himself has spoken about occasions when this country has had difficulties with hurricane, natural disasters, and so on. And we know that he spoke at this time saying all the billions that will come forthcoming to Dominica from World Bank, other agencies, other friendly nations. All of a sudden, but we did not see how that translated into action on the ground, how it transformed lives, how it create linkages in our various sectors, how it create work in construction, in agriculture, and industry, and tourism, and in knowledge industry, and so on. We did not see that. And people are struggling. People's roofs are not covered, as you say. People are still struggling. So let us try and better understand what it is that he's saying had happened to all this money.
Yes. Well, let me just make a gentle response to Mr. Paris. In 2004, the reins of government were passed on to a young man. And look at where we are now. So it's not just a matter of youth per se. It is a matter of youth with the appropriate sensitivity, empathy, the philosophy. That is the person that we need, not merely youth for the sake of youth. Quite frankly, it's the individual that we have to focus on. In terms of where we are, if there is a suggestion that there are no more funds, it confirms our worst fears. It has been stolen on a massive scale. And this is something that any future administration will have to contend with. If in fact we are serious that significant wrongdoing has occurred, if we are serious that the funds which should have been deposited into the consolidative fund has been squandered and stolen, any future administration must deal with it in some way. Otherwise, what we've been saying for years about theft and about the looting of the treasury, insofar as these funds were not deposited into the treasury, would be for naught, would be meaningless. We cannot turn the blind eye to what we see staring us in the face, to what is hiding in plain view. The persons with accounting backgrounds, Thomson Fontaine, economists, and so on, there is irrefutable evidence that the vast majority of those funds never found their way into the state coffers. They never brought relief to Dominicans. They never increased the wages of public servants. In fact, some public servant leaders were content with a 1 or 2% increase, while some of our leaders gave themselves 50% increase. And these are persons who are the top of the wage pole, arrogating to themselves the right to have a 50% increase. You have farmers begging for outlets for their produce. You have persons begging for funds to repair their roofs. You have persons begging for employment. You have young women being seduced in exchange for jobs and scholarships. What a sad state of affairs. Dominica and St. Kitts, this is a tale of two small islands in terms of governance, in terms of what has been done with the net proceeds of the sale of passports. In one island, it was marshaled and mobilized to serve the people, to provide relief to them, whether at Christmas, whether in higher wages, whether amenities, whether in hospitals, whether in repatriating Dominican professionals to work. In Dominica, we've had a negation of everything along those lines of good governance. On the contrary, we have foreigners coming in, allegedly committing murder, involved in the sale of passports. We have some who've come to Dominica brokes, and they left not with 30 pieces of silver, while they left with 30 pieces of silver, but in modern terms, $30 million to a point that at least one, probably more of them, now sit as an ambassador of Dominica in the United States. So we have completely turned on its head all those tenets and principles of good governance. And to the extent that we are suffering, it is because we have not marshaled our forces. We have not joined hands and hearts in unity to deal with this existential threat to the Dominica body politic. And that is where we are today, sad but true. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very sad indeed. I mean, because we keep hearing these complaints from our current leader that, so much has been done. And then they said to look on the ground and you'll see where the money has gone. And I'm listening to the people on the ground, and the people seem to be saying nothing has reached them. As a matter of fact, they're hanging on there waiting for some brown paper bag at Christmas time and a little something now and then to pay for transportation. They ask for scholarships, and some of them get it and then find that the fees of the students are not being paid. So you see, I want to go to Simeon. Simeon, I don't know whether you're hearing us now, and if you can unmute your mic so that we can get you going, because I know that you have a lot to say. Simeon, how are you doing?
Good evening, Mr. Gregoire. How are you this evening? Good evening, Dr. Andre, as usual. Good to hear from you and see you again in a different capacity. I must say, very good job on the commentaries of the Calypso season. And of course, Mr. Paris, much respect to you. I'm very happy to hear of Mr. Paris's utterances earlier on with regard to the youth, because I think at the heart of our discussion has to be the future of Dominica. The future of Dominica doesn't exist in the forests and mountains and hills and the rivers that we boast about. The future of Dominica depends on and rests on our young people. What's going to happen to the future of Dominica? What's going to happen to the best resource any country can have, that is the human resource base of a country. And when you have a situation whereby this human resource capacity is threatened beyond measure by a kind of governance that undermines the stability of their future, it beckons us to ask many questions. At the heart of our discussion tonight, I would like to say, will perhaps should invite us to focus on a few areas, which is what I will stick to. And in reflecting on what is happening in Dominica today, particularly over the past weekend, and the utterances of some people in government and observing certain things, and also to a greater understanding of how Dominicans demonstrate the understanding of things that are happening, we need to put into sharp focus our understanding of what is the purpose of government. And I think we are lacking in our general understanding of what is the purpose of government. If we are to critically examine what is the purpose of government, we must also inherently, as a secular argument, understand what is the role of government. Again, that is another area that seems to be lacking in our general understanding, not only by the masses of the people, but by the people in power. And then that then obviously leads us to the functions of government, because it seems to be today, when one understands the functions of government, we have a government that is essentially non-functioning based on what are the main tasks that a government is called to do. And then quite openly, something that is very poignant, the structure of government in terms of the form of government we have. Because it seems to me that we have today a structure of government that is not in keeping with the right understanding of the purpose and the role of government, and also an understanding of what is the functions of government for the people. So these are some of the questions we have to raise, because just in deliberating a while further, if we are to understand by way of my own introduction and discussion as to what is the purpose of government, okay? Clearly, there needs to be an understanding that the purpose of government, right, is to promote efficiency. When we look at what is happening, the purpose of government is to promote efficiency, the rule of law, and order within a country, and to ensure things are organized and working as expected within a state. The question we have to ask in Dominica today is the purpose of government being fulfilled when we examine today the efficiency of how things are done, the rule of law, how it is done, the order that exists within the country, and how organized we are within our states, even within the very government system. And so if governments are there to make laws and to enact policies and provide social services, expand on human resource, ensure that people are protected, and to ensure that there is a certain employment that takes place to establish a developed state. Okay, a developed state. That's what we are gaining at, the development of Dominica, right? Any function of the government involves putting structures in place. What structures have we put in place to ensure that we have good governance in Dominica? Or what structures have we removed? What structures have been undermined? What structures have been dissolved into anything goes? Okay, that foster peace, unity, social service delivery, and the implementing of ways to enforce the law. And these are some of the things we have to think of. Because in understanding the purpose of government, one has to ask ourselves certain questions to begin with. Does the government today serve the public interest? To what extent does the government today serve the public interest? How many Dominicans can say as a matter of course and as a matter of fact that the government today is serving their interest? What kind of policies has the government put in place to ensure that people have a sense of safety, protection, that our people are employed, and that the purpose of government is to pursue happiness, okay? And hence, the public administration and institutions of our society must of nature serve the people of the country. Okay, and to deliver a kind of the sound policies that would benefit society and the people, and to foster respect for culture and the upholding of societal values and ethics. In terms of our understanding of the purpose of government, we can ask ourselves further, what about the equal distribution of resources, which is one of the main purposes of government? What has been implemented to ensure that according to our country, we have a system in place where we have equal distribution of Dominica's resources? Then again, we can say, do Dominicans feel that the state provides security to the people? And to what I mean, we know in ancient times, if we study the history of politics and governments, the kings and the queens and the oligarchy were supposed to provide things. But to some extent, when we think of our people feeling secure, have the policies that have been put in place from the different wings of government, does that regulate a certain amount of peace and security and encourage people to live a sort of, to feel that they are healthy within their state? Okay, then what about the promotion of the rule of law? Okay, this is the purpose of government. And so when we talk about the purpose of promote the rule of law, when we promote the rule of law, it inherently says that no one is above the law, and that the government's role is to ensure that disputes and other things are resolved, whereby when the rule of law is enacted, people feel protected, that our communities are shaped, and that there is a fostering of the law. What about the delivery of essential services? I mean, when we look at our healthcare, our education system, our infrastructure, our social services, that's one of the purposes of government. Are these things being done equitably in our society to ensure that the poverty levels of our country, right, are not spiked, but that they are diminished to a certain level whereby people can take responsibility for themselves, because they are provided things like clean water, adequate food, employment, and the government has put in place economic policies to promote development. What about employment? What about employment? We know that Dominica has a rising trend of unemployment. What has the government done that shows the greatest strength of its people so that they can trust the system? That we have a national budget where our expenditure does not too much comprise of debt, but where it is invested in salaries and wages so that people employed in the formal sector of government and outside can take up their duty and responsibility so that they can provide meaningfully to the economy. And then, of course, the building of infrastructure. What type of infrastructures have we built in Dominica to enhance our citizens and our economy? And then, of course, the national budget, which is the purpose of Dominica, which is what's supposed to drive everything in the economy. When we review the budget of this government for the past 20 years, or even the past 10 years, how has the national budget in Dominica, what role has it played? And how do people understand the purpose of the budget to deliver a plan that will execute for the country, okay, and ensure that the essential requirements are in place so that things can run smoothly in a country? And so just by this understanding of the purpose of government, it brings us to the point where we need to critically use that as the foundation upon which we begin to think about the role, the function, and the structure of government, which I think I would want to dwell on a little longer during the course of this program. Because clearly, I will say in a nutshell that when one understands those four definitions and attributes to government, it's sad to say that one can safely say we are now existing in a failed state. We have a government. I'm not even sure if we have a government in power, because if one, as I said, if we want to categorize, when we pen these definitions to what government is supposed to be, it's clear that from the point of view of an understanding of governance and accountability and administration, we do have a failed state, because the results are there to show that based on the mere purpose of what government is supposed to be, we are not maximizing the optimum in those regards.
Now, let me hasten to agree with you, Simeon. And I know that Senator Delbert Paris will in fact expand on this thing, especially on the matter of question of the budgets and what have these budgets accomplished and what have these ministers and these ministries accomplished in terms of the budgets that have been approved for them. But I think I want to endorse the fact that the case that you're making about government. I mean, certainly the role of government is to create an enabling environment for its businesses, all its various sectors to thrive, to be able to exercise everything that they can, their creativity, their hard work, and their investments on to make things work for everybody. This is what the role of the private sector is, in fact, to be the engine of growth. But somehow you get a sense now that it's the government that is playing the role of the engine of growth. They want to employ everybody and not allowing the private sector to do that. I certainly agree that the role of the government and the function of government cannot be to tell people to go to hell. It's none of your damn business. That is not part of the role of government. The government has to be transparent, it has to be accountable, and it has to have some integrity. So, Dr. Andre, I wanted to come back to you to expand on all of this, because it seems to me that the enabling environment that we're witnessing today is, as the Prime Minister said, $213 million leaving the shores of the country because some foreign contractors and workers have really seen the benefits of this enabling environment, while our truckers and our workers and all of our people who have a lot of skills and certainly could use some more by collaborating with people who have better experience than them. We're not even seeing that kind of transfer of skills taking place. So in fact, Dr. Andrew, what are your thoughts on all of that? And then your other thoughts on some of these issues?
The sad part of all this is that we know from a historical perspective what good governance is. We don't need it to be defined. We've had the experience and the exposure and the benefits of the governance of Premier Edward Oliver LeBlanc. We saw how he marshaled the resources of the state and put it at the feet and at the behest of Dominicans in terms of agricultural production, in terms of feeder roads, in terms of school opportunities, in terms of housing. So we know what good governance is. And that was continued with Mr. John in terms of the various housing communities which he built, in terms of ensuring that those who benefited from that housing received title for their homes. We know about their opportunities in terms of agriculture and so on. We know what the James administration achieved, their focus on education, their focus on scholarships, without extorting any favors from those who receive those scholarships. We know about their expansion of agriculture. We know the criticism that they received for working two-by-two. So we know what good governance is. So that is why we should know that what we have now is a complete travesty of what good governance is. And why should that be a surprise? Because bear in mind, a former minister, once mocked Patrick John for saying that he was poor after leaving the reins of power in Dominica. Bear in mind, before Edward Oliver LeBlanc was lowered into his eternal rest, they were saying that they would not make the same mistake that he made, which is to leave governance in an impoverished state. So we know there's no mystery here. We understand. So we just have to rescue through good people, energetic, visionary, altruistic persons like Delbert Paris and others and so on. Persons who have a conscience, not just any young person. That's why we're in this state. That is exactly why we're in this condition. But persons who have been nurtured on the bread of sacrifice, who've consumed the wine of honesty, who's been nurtured on a diet of wanting to serve the community, a diet which addresses or which honors the time-honored maxim that whatever you do to the least of my brothers, that you do unto me. A diet which dictates that you are your brother's keeper. A diet which emphasizes that the resources of the state should be made to work to the advantage of the people, not to foreigners. So this is not rocket science we're talking about. We're talking about honesty in governance. And that has been consciously and patently lacking over the last 20 years. Why else would we be wondering about who owns this big 50 million mysterious building? Why else would there be talk about persons involved in the sale of passports just having the means, the facility to buy properties all over Dominica in a fashion which is inconsistent with their known sources of income? We are being plagued by the vices that, quite frankly, we've been warned about from the time we were small. And that is the challenge that Dominica is facing. And that is why there is hope that there seems to be some indication that Dominicans are now coming to their senses. They now realize this is not a matter of the good, the bad, and the ugly, or the UWP versus the DLP. It is a matter of salvation to Dominica. And in Lent, it is not a matter of wondering, Gasson, how come Lazarus came out? We should be wondering, how should Dominica come out of this hole into which it has been forced? And that is the mission that we face.
Very true. Very well said. And Senator Paris, you said something a moment ago about the youth. And it is very heartening to see you and then some of the young people like yourself putting yourself in getting involved in public service. I hope that you plan to continue a career in public service. I certainly hope so, because I think you've started on the right track. You seem to be saying the right things and doing the right things. And we're looking forward to seeing you having a very long career in public service. But certainly, when you listen to some of what's been said by Simeon, some of what's been said by Dr. Andre, and you hear things like budgets. I mean, I'm sure that hurts your mind when you think of budgets, and then you're in ministries, they get so much money and we only use 1% of their budget, and then ministers talking as though they do something. You see what Simeon is saying, government's supposed to work. You're supposed to work, that is why you're being paid. But then if you don't use more than 1% of your budget, what work have you done? Where's the fruits of your labor? So I wanted to come back to you for us to talk about some of those things. And I want you to keep focus on the role of the youth in all of this, because it seems to me that it's important that we have to engage the youth, and the youth have to get like you to become conscious of the fact that they have a real role to play, a key role to play, an important role to play in the direction the country has to take. Let me just go back to you. Can unmute your mic so we can.
Mr. G, plenty has been said. I'll address your first comment regarding my tenure or my possible tenure in public life. I was raised by a God-fearing man called Stuart Paris.
I know him. I know him very well, and I know he's God-fearing too.
You know him very well, but who you may not know very well is my mother. And without my mother in our family, I don't think me and my father would have anything to fall back on. But she is the real backbone of our family, and one thing she has always encouraged me to do is to be part of the solution, an honest, humble part of the solution. Wherever the good is, to find myself there and put my hands to work. So at this point, that is what I can promise my parents and you and everybody in Dominica. Dominica is for all of us. I'm part of the country too, and whatever, the Bible says, whatever good your hands find to do, that you should do with all your might. So that's my commitment, Mr. G. However God sees it fit to use me in advancing the cause in Dominica, I'll make myself available. But Mr. G, I want to comment on what Mr. Simeon Joseph said. There's a lot of things, and it seemed as though he was looking at my notes somewhere, because he sort of wrapped up a lot of my presentation with the questions that he asked. The role of government, the purpose of government, the function of government, and the structure. That goes into detail. And Mr. Joseph, to be honest with you, we need a retreat to actually break this thing down and actually study it. Because you're right, those of us outside of government maybe need a better understanding of what the government is and what we should expect from them and what we should be holding them accountable to be doing. But more so, the people who are employed and getting paid and getting pay raises to be governors, I think they need a refresher, because they have not been doing a good job, and it's taken 24 years, and they have not been able to get that train back on the track that it's supposed to be. And here's what we have succeeded to do. We have succeeded to muddy the conversation of political expediency and ethical governance in a country, so that every time the conversation about governance starts to raise its head, you have someone jumping down your throat that you don't like a particular politician, or you just against the government, or everything the government do is a problem. No, that's not the conversation. Political expediency has its place, and we can have our political banters as much as we want, but that has its place and its time. After that is finished, governance is what takes precedence and what becomes front and center. And if we don't understand what that is and what we should be expecting, and not just what our governors are supposed to be doing, but what we as a people should be doing, how we should be positioning ourselves, how we should be helping them and reminding them of their role, that they are not kings and they are not supremos. Precisely. They are servants. Servants that get paid pretty well with a lot of nice benefits.
Yeah.
But servants nonetheless, and they have a mandate and a job to do, and their responsibility is to do it. Now, Mr. G, you started speaking about budget. You have people who work for you, Mr. G, and in your lifetime, you have worked for others. And if you have been given resources, there were resource allocations made to you or your department or your company. You have to give an account of how those resources were used. You have to give an account of whether you were able to hit your targets or not. You have to be responsible and accountable for the charge that you have been given, especially if the money and the resources are not yours, right? In today's government system in Dominica, we don't see that happening. Again, another mixing and mudding of the conversation, so much so that it loses its substance. In a budgetary period, or take for instance when we're approving the budget in July, and it's big and fancy and everybody's dressed nice in the parliament, that is what we're expecting governors to come and do, to report on how they have been able to use the resources allocated to their ministries that are in their charge, the difficulties that they experience, and the things that they were able to accomplish. But instead, you don't have that. You don't have a real ethical going through of the numbers and looking. You instead, what you have is a lot of sensationalism, a lot of fanfare. And one thing happened this year that I don't want us to miss. The young people, the National Youth Council, took it upon themselves to go through and read that budget document. Not the nice speech by the Minister of Finance, but the actual estimates. Where's mine? It's somewhere in the house. The actual estimates. They went through it and they were able to challenge the government from a youth perspective, looking at what was done and what was placed in the budget for them. And I commended them for it. I was actually at the event. It was something noble, and I hope that they have the courage to continue, because that is the role of young people. Young people are not as misguided as they seem or pretend to be sometimes. That maybe they do in today's day have a shorter attention span and they get bored easily. They get distracted easily. You know, all this dopamine that we have, we soaking in every day on our job and at our homes. It's a lot of light and fanfare coming into our eyes all the time. But young people have the capacity to hold their governors accountable. And through the National Youth Council, you saw them doing that. But Mr. G, more than that, if you listen, if your ears are to the ground, you look at social media, in recent times, you have seen a number of new voices coming out and holding the government to account. Not by looking at all of the fancy things, but by evaluating real Dominican life and explaining their experience, evaluating their experience from a young person's perspective. And it will show you that they know what they're missing and they know what they want. What we need to do is to marry that amount of desire and concern with actual insight and education, and most importantly, access to resources, access to information, access to training, that these people, these young people who are intelligent enough, who have gone to school, who have the world at their fingertips every single day, that they can take charge of their own future in their own country and succeed. Mr. G, you have productive sectors where you heard the minister in recent times, you know, again, a lot of political expediency talking about certain things. And to be honest, Mr. G, you can't blame them, right? Their areas of strength is where they will try as best they can to shine. But the areas of strength does not necessarily translate to good governance. Talking about that individuals should create multiple streams of income for themselves and so on and so on. And it is a good idea. But somebody else should say that, not the minister. Reason being, and we can go back years to see how in one of the productive sectors, even when we have money allocated to invest under the public sector investment program, in the area, in the ministry, in the industry of tourism, where we talk about tourism a lot, where we expect and we explain that tourism is everybody's business and we should be doing such and such and such, and how we expect that tourism will be contributing X amount to our GDP in a number of years. But that won't happen if that level of performance is what is continued to be demonstrated in the ministry. Just last year, only 10.7%, to be exact, of the budget was spent. And I asked Matt earlier last week, he said that it was his minister. So I asked him, you know, you may have a good relationship with her. Just approach her and ask her, what is the rate of implementation this year? Because those monies that are allocated to those ministries in the productive sectors, in construction, in tourism, in agriculture, these are some of our productive sectors that, if managed well, can be self-sustaining. They can create sustainability, and where people, in particular young people, have the opportunity to be innovative and to create avenues for themselves to enjoy life and to thrive and to create their own success. But if the funds that are allocated to your ministry, you don't find ways to invest them so that young people and older people can create multiple streams for themselves, and then you turn around and ask them to do it, it's really disingenuous. And going back to the conversation of the role of government, that's not what your governors are supposed to do. Your governors are supposed to facilitate people taking charge of their own life and creating their own success in their own country. It goes back to the same thing that you were mentioning as it relates to the distribution of resources. You have resources locally, and I personally think, this is my personal view, that Dominica has enough resources, both human and tangible physical resources, for us to create a sustainable environment that can thrive, so that 20 years from now we'll still have a Dominica worth living in, right? But if it's not managed properly, the people who are in government don't understand the role and function of what governance is, and we get away from the partisan politics. If we don't succeed to do that, and we haven't for 24 years, if we don't succeed to do that, we will collapse our own economy, and somebody else will have to bail us out at some point.
You know, that is very, very instructive. And Simeon, I want to go back to you for a moment there, because what ministers supposed to do in terms of budgets, right? Because every year they have this budget call, so all ministries, all departments supposed to submit something and say, this is the plan, these are the goals, these are the things that we want to accomplish. And so they put up stuff, and then they get a budget approved, and they use 1% of the approved. So that means they have not done the stuff that they said they were going to do. Now, this is evidenced in the fact that the leader of the country, on at least 2 occasions at election time, you put in your skin and you tell them, all you're not doing all your work, I'm changing you all. New candidates, new ministers, moving them all around the place. He's actually evidencing that they have not been doing their work. They have been fulfilling the promises made to the people in their budgets. So the only thing that we see happening is that big salary increases for ministers and nothing for public officers. So in essence, what I'm saying, Simeon, is that this budget thing, just as a separate one item thing, that budget thing is not working at all. And so you're trying to tell me that the young people of Dominica don't know that they can't pay their light bill? You're trying to tell me they don't know that they can't pay their mapping, or their mapping, they can't pay GG Cell and Flow. And so, I mean, come on, let's get serious.
Well, going back to the purpose of government again, you see, one of the most important purposes of government is to make policies. That's why you have a government, to make policies, not to rule, to make policies. And so a government doesn't just make any policy. A government is supposed to enact healthy policies based on public needs and requirements. So in speaking of the budget, whenever the budget is put in Parliament or tabled in Parliament, is the budget based on public needs and requirements, or is it based on the wishes of the political directorate? Really and truly. Because you see, the system of government we have is one that is called a parliamentary democracy, whereby any policy that the government proposes or chooses to enact comes from the people. The people working through their parliamentary representatives, influencing their representatives in parliament and government, provide the necessary grassroots information that is needed to be taken to the government so that they can become the front burner needs of the people. Now, in considering the budget, there's no doubt that the government is in charge of public finance. And hence the major role and the purpose of government is to have a plan. not only to ensure that there are policies in place, but it's to have a plan and to deliver and execute that plan through the national budget. That's what it is. And so the government ensures that all the essential requirements for the budget are in place. Everything runs smoothly and everyone economically and socially benefits. That's what the budget is about. When you pass a budget to ensure that through the emanating information of their representatives in parliament, these issues, the front burner issues, are included into the budget so that when the budget is passed, the government is able to run on its promises to ensure that people benefit economically and socially. That's what the budget is. It's not a pie in the sky, hairy-fairy laundry list of ideas developed by some political director somewhere to say, okay, we want to have a fancy this here and a fancy that here. Or we have this grandiose idea that we want to present to people. That's also what we're going to do for them. That's not the idea of a budget. This is one of the things when we're talking about the role and the function of government, we in Dominica must come to understand, because we have lost that tenure. When Mr. Libla passed the budget, it was clear that the budget Mr. Libla passed came from the rural folk whom his parliamentary representatives represented, obviously brought to cabinet to be discussed and say, okay, the East Coast needs a road, or the North Coast needs an airport, or the farmers in Woodford Hill need a feeder road, or the fishermen in Marigot or Newtown or Soufriere, they need a jetty. These sentiments are echoed, and so whenever the budget is passed, or there needs to be improvement in the hospital sector for the nurses and the healthcare, or there needs to be better education system, like when perhaps Mr. Christian was education minister, he saw the need for a state college, for the Alpha Center, for the improvement of various aspects of the Teachers College. So these were the needs that were presented, and so the budget was passed. And so when you go to Parliament with a budget, you present a national plan for the people that is emanated from the essential requirements of the people, so that the state can run smoothly and benefitly. And so when a government understands its role in proper planning and implementation of measures for the national budget, that's when the country can grow. The country will not grow by hairy-fairy, pie-in-the-sky ideas that you just want to flabbergastically put on a budget to give people false hope, but that people need to hear, okay, my government intends to spend on areas that is going to improve my life. And so this then will open the door for citizens to have opportunities in life, because when a government says, okay, tomorrow I am going to improve somewhere in Marigot, because the parliamentary representative of Marigot has come to me and says, Marigot needs this. And the government decides, okay, based on the representation from the parliamentary representative in Marigot, that's what Marigot needs. It's tabled in parliament. The money goes back into Marigot. And what does that do? It employs Marigot people. It creates opportunities for Marigot people to get in, to do some kind of investment in whatever projects are being done there. It provides opportunities for maybe young people to become interns and invest their time. It relieves people of Marigot from unemployment. So that is the cycle, what you call the cycle of development. That's what the budgets are supposed to run. And so the government then will ensure that what they will do is that they are, through the budget, playing a huge role in taking the development on a different path that would better the conditions and help the citizens. And it's unfortunate today that again, in totally understanding the role of government, there is no want for realizing that when I see today the Prime Minister goes around a place, for instance, okay, and he just without the knowledge of his cabinet or his parliamentary representatives, visits a village or constituency, and following behind him is a certain permanent secretary for a notebook, writing down everything that he says, because his utterances are so unplanned, are so uninformed, that you go and writing down, and then everywhere he goes, she's following him with a book, making notes. What happens to those things? What happens to all those notes that are done? Do they go back to cabinet? No. Sadly to say, our governmental system has been dismantled, because the way government is supposed to operate, that is not how it is operating. Just bear with me as I maybe amplify on this a little. You know, when in recent times, for instance, people have been saying things like, you need a health person to be Minister of Health, or you need an agriculturist to be Minister of Agriculture, or you need an engineer to be Minister of Communications and Works. That's nonsensical. Because the system of government is not supposed to work with the minister in charge. The system of government is supposed to work with the minister as the head of a ministry, who is guided by a permanent secretary, who is supposed to be knowledgeable in public service administration, general orders, the Public Service Act, the standing rules and ordinances, the financial store rules, etc. And then every minister is supposed to have a technocrat. So the Ministry of Health will have a chief medical officer who is trained in medicine. The Ministry of Education will have a chief education officer who is trained in education. The Ministry of Agriculture will have a chief technical officer who is trained in agriculture. So when the minister meets with his team of senior managers on a Monday morning, he goes to them and he presents to them ideas from cabinet from one level, and they present to him information from the inline ministry. They discuss it, and whatever the minister says, his technical advisor will give him the agricultural, medical, engineering, whatever advice, and his permanent secretary will give him the administrative advice, so that eclectically he is charged with professional and knowledgeable information to take back to cabinet for cabinet to make a decision. It is not the other way around, where cabinet sends down an order to a minister to direct his public servants to implement. And that's where things begin to go wrong. Things begin to go wrong because that is not how it operates today, unfortunately. And so we have ministers who are non-functioning because they haven't got the initiative from their staff to guide them as to the needs of the ministry or the national agenda. We have ministers who get lost in what are the pronouncements of the prime minister, and so they take it back to their staff, and sometimes you find these things are not feasible because they are just political pronouncements that cannot be subsumed into the programs, plans, and budget of the ministry. So, for instance, you go to Parliament and you pass a budget of $15 million for tourism without the necessary inline advice from the chief technical officer in the Ministry of Tourism or other stakeholders in the Ministry of Tourism to say, okay, based on the country's needs of areas like the Trafalgar Falls, the freshwater lake, the Emerald Pool, and other natural spots in Dominica, the hotel industry, the tourism industry. These are the needs. And so when you incrementally do your line item costing, you come up with $15 million to take to Parliament, which is then transmitted back to the senior financial officer in the ministry to be implemented. And so you have a situation where after 1 year, you budget 12 million, and so you don't even spend 1 million because the allocation for the spending did not come from the information and the necessary advice within the ministry. And so it goes amok. And you have a number of other instances, for instance, where the hospital is devoid of supplies, schools are devoid of supplies, and many areas are devoid of supplies. Because why? What we have is just a presentation of a national figure that it does not emanate from a proper functioning of a ministry. And that is why a minister must not be knowledgeable in his field, because if he's knowledgeable in his field, he's going to be arrogant. He's going to be a Mr. Know-it-all. He won't listen to his technocrats and his advisors. And that is where the eclectic process comes in, where the specialists, the professionals, the knowledgeable people sit in the ministry to advise the figurehead as to how the ministry should run, so that he in turn is able to take the right information to cabinet, where you have the other body of unknowns having been guided by the professionals. And so that is why you have a cabinet of ministers who are non-functioning, who are non-productive. I'm not the one who said it. The very prime minister said it. Because their basis for their management is not founded on some governmental principles. That's how it goes. Okay? And that you see how all that plays a role in how we have what we have today. If it was done that way, I'm sure we'd have a reduction in unemployment, because the Ministry of Labor and Social Services would have been able to collect their data as to the employment figures in the country, the areas. They would have looked at the national training, priority training needs area, and would have been able to identify the areas of national training need. They would be able to gather the demographics of the population from the different parts of Dominica and the different people who would have graduated and are unemployed. They would then be able to say, okay, this is where we're going to create employment, because of the fact that we have the figures of our trained professionals, our unemployed skilled persons, our unemployed high school students, and this is where we're going to, and therefore the budget for employment and job creation would emanate from the Ministry of Social Services, and then cabinet would make a decision and say, this is going to be our employment plan. When you just say we're going to employ people under NEP, you don't know where you're putting them. That's not how it works in government. And that's why I keep saying we have a failed state. And unfortunately, the disaster is we have permanent secretaries who have been brought into the public service without the knowledge of how the public service is supposed to be run. We have technocrats who have been appointed to positions without the requisite qualification, experience, and training to advise the ministers. And so we have situations where a permanent secretary will tell the minister, the PMC, that's not how it's supposed to run. That's not how it's supposed to run, unfortunately. So not only is the political functioning of government undermined, the administrative system of our government has been watershed. And so we come to the trajectory where government doesn't function as it should be. And so when a government doesn't function as it should be, the developmental path of the country is at stake.
And then, of course, Simeon, you would think that somebody is learning from experience in some of those things as they go along, because every year, of course, those budgets promise all those things, all those deliverables. They promise exports going to increase, they promise more jobs, they promise we're going to do all these things, but our natural resources, our tourism natural endowments, they promise all kind of things about the construction sector, promise about airport and geothermal. So you can understand.
Well, that's because the consultative process of government is dead.
Well,
I mean, it was there from every government you can think of. I know I've been a public servant, and I've been part of consultations with Pierre Charles and Edison James and Eugenia Charles, and going way back, the consultative process of government. Let us look for one example. How do you think Pat Region was able to build 500 houses across Dominica? It wasn't because of a political thing. It wasn't because of that. It was because of people having done their research to recognize that there are a number of people in Roseau. That was done. Roseau needed expansion. There were certain people who were living in certain areas in Dominica who did not have their home in those days, and the statistics are there to clear. If you go back, Mr. Gregoire, and I've had the opportunity to look at it, and you look at the proposal to the Caribbean Development Bank, and maybe Oliver Serafin, if he's alive, he should call in tonight because he was Minister of Housing at the time.
I'm sure he's listening. Let's hope.
Right? If you go back, and I would encourage Dominicans to get a copy, and you see the research and the project proposal to the Caribbean Development Bank for the construction of low-cost housing in Dominica, you will see how our government operated. Today, what we are doing, we have somebody in Dubai doing a template of a plan of some kind of house and just planting them all over Dominica and just installing them everywhere. Okay? The Calibishi housing scheme came about because of the fact that land was acquired in Savanpai and the village of Calibishi was expanding. And so Osborne Theodore at the time decided, okay, based on the fact that the village was expanding and it was encroaching on agricultural areas, the government acquired Savanpai and set up house. Point Michel was the same thing, the expansion of the village. There were certain economic and political and social inquiries done for the justification of those projects. Today is just to say, well, okay, we're selling passports. We have $2 million to spend, or how many $1 billion to spend? Let us put a housing complex in Lapland. Let's put one by the riverside. Let's put one in Point Michel. And that's what it's done.
Well, that's because, Simeon, you mentioned it earlier, it's political expediency. In other words, to get the vote. But Dr. Andrea, I want to come to you because you can see this disaster that's been created, and the Prime Minister himself has acknowledged that in 3 consecutive elections. And the way he has acknowledged that is by changing all of those people and putting new people in the places. He said they're not functioning. And he said we can't tell people to come and vote for us and then we're not checking them, we're not delivering products to them. And he changed them. And then, Dr. Andrew, you can see why, for example, because of this flawed budget process and the fact that we're not doing it the right way and we're not taking a look at the deliverables, we're not keeping our eyes on the deliverables, and we're not being held accountable, right? And there's no transparency. So in fact, PS is afraid to tell ministers anything. In fact, that's what Simeon is saying. And you can see now what is going on there now. The last budget, for example, 60% of that budget was supposed to rely on CBI funds, something like that. And now the Prime Minister is telling us the CBI funds not coming again. Where's the money? We don't know. But the point is, what happens to your budget? How are you going to implement the budget when 60% of the funds are supposed to come from the CBI revenues, which are no longer forthcoming? How are you going to deliver the international airport if it's not forthcoming? How are you going to deliver the geothermal energy plant if it's not forthcoming? So Dr. Andrea, as you make your further comments, maybe you might want to see if you can address 1 or 2 of those as well.
Okay, let me indicate that I think both Mr. Parrish and Mr. Joseph, they're too kind. They're too kind when they indicate that they don't understand the role of government. They do. They do, but their policy has been to destroy the traditional role of government and to make what passes as governance serve their own personal and selfish interests. I mean, look at the various policies that have been pronounced over the decade or two. The policy that agriculture is a has-been industry. Isn't that a repudiation of all the previous administrations which focused on agricultural production as the mainstay of Dominica's economy? Look at the policy reflected in the fact that what we have is a system of no bid contracts. Only foreigners need apply. Only foreigners will be given, whether it's Gadakan, whether it's the one from St. Lucia, whether it's the Chinese. That's their policy. In other words, a policy of starving Dominicans. It's as blatant as you can. So this is not a matter of, well, they don't understand what governance is. They do, my friends. It's a vindictive, it's a pernicious, and it's an egregious type of policy. Look at the policy, for example, of funds being spent, not, for example, in the hotel industry. You notice that those who do not support the government involved in the hotel industry are getting squeezed out of that industry. You think this is because of a lack of understanding? This is because of a pernicious and deliberate attempt to starve those who do not support the government. Look at the policy of giving scholarships. You think they don't understand? When Edison James hired or matriculated, 20 doctors and so on, that was a policy. But if students are being given awards based on who or what their political affiliation is, then what do you expect? It's a prostitution of government. That has nothing to do with lack of understanding. The whole question of electoral reform, a deliberate perversion of our electoral laws. The cruel irony is that it is a Dominican lawyer who cleansed the list in Antigua. And it is that same Antigua which has provided refuge for the architects of these lawyers who perverted the electoral laws of Dominica. This is deliberate. This is part of an overall master plan. This is a plan designed to enrich a certain few. Not even all laborites, because those at the bottom of the rung, they have no use for them. You remember Crazy T's famous comment years ago? Them kind of women there, they don't have any use for these folk. They only have use for those who are getting grants, which are not being repaid. That is the persons that governance, or malgovernance to be precise, are serving. These are the folk who are being served by the malgovernance in Dominica. And the only question is, how long will Dominican endure that sad and sorry state of affairs? Fortunately, there's hope. There's hope on account of people like Mr. Paris, Mr. Joseph, and others in the movement, those who braved the gauntlet of the state to attend that meeting on the 25th of February. Was it the 25th of February? Yes, I believe it was. That is where the hope lies, to bring forth or bring back or resurrect good governance in Dominica, because it's been stolen, it's been savaged, it's been eviscerated. And it's only the patriots can restore law and order in Dominica. That's where we are now.
Yes, that's certainly where we are. But I wanted to, I want to take a little break now and go to Lambi and ask Lambi to give the folks the telephone numbers so that they can interact with us for a moment. But as Lambi is getting set to do that, let me just say on the other side of the break, and we come from Lambi, and then we're going to be taking some calls in between. But I want us to come back and talk about electoral reform, because it seems to me that electoral reform is one of the things that's going to be absolutely necessary in order to get any kind of change of governance, to level the playing field so that we can hopefully have free and fair elections, which we have not been having if we have to follow the instruction of the CCJ. Tainted elections is what they mentioned. So we have to be very, very concerned about that. And so whatever process is taking place now, whoever is writing out those new draft laws and regulations for electoral reform and campaign finance reform, I think the people have to be integrally involved in that so that no new bill should go to the parliament before the people themselves have examined them, because you, Dr. Andre, yourself participated, many of us did, and we know exactly a number of the recommendations that have to be made to modernize our electoral laws. We don't have to look very far. Right around us there in Antigua and in St. Kitts and in Barbados and in Trinidad, Jamaica, many of these countries have done it. So it's not rocket science. The only reason it's taking so long is because we know it is this famous email that said, if you let these fellas go on, it is madness, it will affect your election winning legacy. Let's give the people the numbers so you can, let's take a few calls when they're ready.
The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, all local numbers, and the international number 305-432-9624. Let me run those one more time. 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, and 305-432-9624. And we already have someone on the line. So caller, standing by, please go ahead. Caller, are you there?
We're not hearing the caller, Lambi. So
The caller moved away. So continue.
okay, so you just make us a sign as soon as you have a call. So I'll ask the caller to call back. Happy
Mr.
to
G,
hear from you. Yeah, go right ahead.
with your permission, you asked a question earlier. How we're going to deliver on all of the promises that have been made to the people of Dominica, based on our budgets, or all of our politicking, and so on and so forth. One of the things that struck me, even as a younger individual, I don't think I was finished with school yet. Maybe I was. I heard the leader of government say that the public sector is the engine of growth in Dominica. And I thought I misheard him. But on multiple occasions, he has repeated that same statement. Now, I don't know, and Dr. Irving said that Mr. Joseph and I are too kind, maybe because of how we were raised and because of the area of the country we come from. But I don't know if he was saying it out of a statement of fact, that he has recognized that, or if he was mentioning that because that is a policy statement of his, that is what he believes. Because if that is so, it would mean that Simeon Joseph is right. They do not know what they're doing. Because if your public sector, you have designed it to be your engine of growth, you have completely lost the idea of what governance is supposed to be. Because where's your tax base? If you have a failing private sector, you are completely doomed. And that is what we have in Dominica. There has not been a concerted effort to revive an independent private sector, a private sector that forms a healthy tax base for the government. So a lot of the things that we have done with our citizenship by investment program, and I did get chastised in the parliament for saying a lot of those heavy investments should have been put into geothermal, and it should have been put into productive sectors. I got chastised for that. But the fact is a fact. I think we have a call.
Yeah, Lambi, let's take a call. Go right ahead.
Caller, please go ahead.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening.
I am saying if Dominica was being governed in a democratic way, the Prime Minister, the police in Dominica would have arrested the Prime Minister already, or he would be under investigation. Dominica is not being governed in a democratic way. It is a socialist country. All the police in Dominica are doing right now is terrorizing the local people. Just today, they went after Linton's brother. That's what they're doing. That is a playbook from Putin's book. They're playing. It is just crazy. It is just crazy. Meanwhile, billions of dollars are out there. No one accounting for it. The police are not doing their job. Why don't they send the Dominica police force and the Barbados police force and a bunch of idiots who went to Salisbury, use tear gas on the people? Send them to Haiti. Why they want the people to come from Kenya to go to Haiti? Let's send his boys, his police to Haiti to liberate Haiti. Thank you.
And thank you so much for your call. You have another call, Lambi?
Yes, we do. Caller, please go ahead.
Yes, good night, Lambi.
Good night.
Mr. G, good night to you and to the entire panel.
And good night to you too.
Yeah, Mr. G, I am Tony Caesar. Let me identify myself. I am not a promoter, neither a subscriber of wrong things. I was raised in a house when my father told us and taught us, whenever we see wrong things, run away from them. But Mr. G, in light of what is taking place in our country, our lovely country, what is it you can put in place? Because I can foresee that it is going to come a time, not too long from now, where poor people, blind people, ordinary people will start saying some very, very, very dangerous things on this radio station to what is going on in Dominica. What is it you can put in place? I don't know if if the lawyer will be able to help me to understand that. If there's anything we could put in place to protect the radio station, because Mr. G, Dominica is getting worse and worse and worse, you know. When I used to ask the Prime Minister whether he would accept defeat couple person asked me, why are you asking this question? If he's out, he gonna go. In my mind, he will never want to leave. Things will happen before he leave. I don't want to say what I'm seeing. So I'm asking you, Mr. G, isn't there anything legally you can put in place for when blind people, sick people, poor people, in their frustration, say things against this prime minister and his government? Is there anything is there anything that can be put in place? I'm asking.
Well, I think it's a good question. The answer is that there's lots of things. I'll certainly let Dr. Andre answer that, but it's certainly a lot of things that can be done. But right now, the most critical thing that can be done is a change of governance. You have to change the regime in office. They've been there too long. It's 24 years. It's time for them to go. I mean, this is the democracy, isn't it? Which other country in the region is keeping a government in there so long? None of them. Which other country have not reformed and modernized electoral laws? Only Dominica. And so we need to go back and get this done, do the electoral reforms, have a free, level playing field, have free and fair elections, and let the chips fall where they may. I think what can be done now is what the people are trying to do now. All the opposition forces must put their heads together, stop being divided and have people's ego pulling them all over the place. You all don't have money as individuals. Everybody put their resources together. Let the public, Dominicans at home and abroad, see that you're making sure put all your best brains in one place. All your people who are resourceful and creative, and all your people like Delbert Paris, who are willing to sacrifice for the country. And Simeon Joseph, you hear Simeon Joseph all the time. He's not afraid to make this. He knows they will come after him, but he's putting himself out there because he's putting country first. These are some of the things that the people can do. It is within their grasp. They can do that. And so they need to do it, because this is the only thing. I mean, yeah, we can talk, but I mean, look, what happened in the Committee for National Salvation in 1979, a lot of young people will not know that, is that this committee got all of the stakeholders in all of the sectors to be part of that committee. So when Mr. Savre came out and said the pot shall not work and the nurses shall not work, this was not an accident. It's because all these organizations were together in this, singing from the same hymn sheet. And so when Savre said that the businesses actually shut down and told the workers they can go out to the demonstrations, that is how you had a 47-day strike. And Mr. Savre was able to say to the government, we're not coming out until we get 131, 121% increase. And he got it. But today we have the DPSU struggling to get 1% for its members. This cannot, I mean, how can people accept that? Dr. Andre, maybe you can help me out with that. I'm just a guy from Granby.
Well, I don't make miracles. I mean, how they can accept 1 or 2% when the leadership of the country is helping themselves to 50%, to 30%, to 28%. I can't understand that, and how the leadership of some of these unions are content with that state of affairs. I don't know, to be honest with you. But your last caller asked a question: what can you do to protect, first of all, the radio station by necessary implication, the Dominican society? First of all, many of your hosts actually do something to protect the radio station. On many occasions, they caution callers to watch your language, and they apologize on behalf of the callers. And certainly in many of your programs, you have a disclaimer notice that the radio station will not be responsible for this program or that program or what is said therein. So at least you've taken rudimentary steps to protect the station. How can Dominicans protect themselves? Well, they've started, I hope. There was a recent Do Nothing campaign, and I know it came under the scrutiny of some of the ministers speaking out of a canister of ignorance. And but that is a good start, because Dominicans are increasingly signaling their intention to do nothing, rather to be complicit in a state of affairs where many people, hundreds of people, cannot afford to fix their roofs, but we can afford their own taxpayers' money to spend $64,000 a month to give a leader to feed his vanity. Dominicans are doing nothing because they want to dissociate themselves from that sad state of affairs. They want to disassociate themselves from a state of affairs where ministers are helping themselves to the coffers of the state by giving themselves significant increases in salary, when NEP workers have to wait for months to be paid a meager, or let me use a word I grew up with, or a meg salary of $800 a month. Huh? Dominicans are signaling their intention that this sad state of affairs, they will not just go along as if everything is all right, but they will take a modest stand to say that this ain't right. It doesn't happen in any other countries. One of your callers on your radio stations today talked about the $30 million we got. I think she identified the organization. I think it was the World Health Organization for COVID relief. What did Dominicans get? You're being given $30 million as a gift for all Dominicans to provide relief to them. And yet what you have acolytes. You have these fellas in trucks in the night distributing brown paper bags to the party faithful. So the whole process of good governance has been perverted. And Dominicans are saying that this is just wrong. We're all humans. We all pay taxes. You think these fellas who come brooks to Dominica and leave millionaires, you think they pay taxes in Dominica? Not at all. But these are the people who are the major beneficiaries of the wealth of Dominica. And this is where we are at now. We are at a crossroads where we have to ask ourselves, if we do nothing, what's going to happen? Look at the hospital. Look at the deaths. Look at what's happening. Look at the NEP workers. Look at other workers. Look at persons who've been acting for 10 years. Jesus Christ, we should have a movie industry in this place. You know? And are we just to sit back and say, well, you know, we're not capable of being appointed or being promoted, of reaping the benefits of good governance? Who are we? We have to do something to show our revulsion at that sad state of affairs. And the Do Nothing program is a wonderful. In fact, it was inspired by, I think, was it the president, Gasso? The president of Dominica? We shall not work. It was bad. It was good then, but it's not good now. We should just take our licks in silence. We should do like this poor wretch in La Plaine who was beaten by a former minister. And he said, beat me more. Thank you.
You should have beat me earlier. I would have got that little house earlier. Lambi, did you want to take a call before we moved on? Or?
There was a caller in there. Let me see if it's still there. Caller, are you still around? Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Good evening, Dominica. Good evening, everybody. Mr. Gregoire, good evening. You talk about the geothermal, and I want them to really shine a little light on that. Mr. Gregoire, we have a geothermal where we spend almost $300 to $300 million. Mr. Gregoire, Mr. Vince came out and tell us the only thing we could do is go to 8 Bank, get $10 million, and take that company and give it to another company overseas. Not taking, in fact, the health of the people in the community. They did not do an environmental study to see how the constituency dealing with that situation. So what we're saying is that this geothermal, Dominicans have to wait 27 years before they claim that geothermal to be their own. Do you know that 6 to 7 election cycle? My question is to Judge Andre, can a prime minister within that time challenge that deal? Because it's not fair that two guys, Kerry and Vince, could enter into an agreement. And trust me, they don't have the mass support of Dominicans. They have just 30%, and they could cut a kind of deal like that and ratify the deal with $10 million. It means that child that born in the Princess Margaret Hospital have to wait 27 years to look up on that course and say that belongs to us. I I believe Dominicans have to take that into consideration and see that deal is not a good deal. It's a corrupt deal, and we need to take that into consideration. God bless Dominica. Thank you.
God bless Dominica too, and God bless you too. I mean, certainly we can respond to that, and I believe we all can contribute to that. I mean, let's face it, in terms of the geothermal, and I want to come back to that Brian Linton thing in a little while. But in terms of that geothermal project, I think the airport project is in the same boat, frankly, in terms of the lack of technical studies and so on, and the inability to say exactly what this thing is going to cost. How do we know, for example, and I heard the minister say that, oh, this is going to result in cheaper electricity for households. How does he know that? You've already spent, what, 150, 200 million, whatever you spend on that already. You haven't even built a power plant yet. You know, I mean, Delbert can tell us, I mean, it's going to cost a lot of money to do that. You have to design the thing. Each of these things an individual design. You have to get it designed. You have to get it implemented. Now you put another middleman. You just signed a contract with another middleman, and a wealthy firm, and you tell a local bank that you have to provide a guarantee for this very wealthy company for millions of dollars just for them to do this. And then you are going to put them in the middle and say, then they're going to produce electricity, and then they're going to sell electricity to Domlec, and then Domlec is going to sell electricity to consumers. How on earth how do you get to the point, you know, for sure that electricity to the households going to cost less, to the businesses that want to get involved in industry, that want to be internationally competitive? How do you know that your electricity rates are going to be cheaper than those companies? Are there not simpler, faster ways that you can get that, maybe even whatever, I mean, other forms of energy that you could use, renewable energy you could use, that will cost so much money, that you could implement so much quicker? So these are some of the issues. Again, it comes back to the question of governance, the question of budgeting. I mean, come on, don't tell me that you did not get an indication that the passport revenues were going to be declined. The British have been talking to us, the Europeans have been talking to us, the Canadians already told us we have to have visa, all that thing. You knew.
The Irish as of today.
Exactly. You knew. The Irish again today. I mean, and that's just the beginning of the thing, you know. So you can see the dominoes falling in place. And then the Prime Minister finally publicly admits this thing looked like the revenues that we were thinking of, slowing down on this thing and so on, but he knew the revenues were not going to be forthcoming. And you know why? Because we went into this, what you call this, largesse of appointing all kinds of ambassadors of very dubious character. Not only dubious character, Dr. Andrew can tell you, these are some of the criminals who are jailed. Some are still in jail, and you're trying to tell me that the British wouldn't notice that these people are getting this passport for them to come to the countries when these people are already banned from entering the country, just looking for another way to come back and do what they have to do. Come on, don't tell me you didn't know that. And now your whole budget is falling apart, because 60% of your thing depends on that. How on earth you expect to be able to implement any of those deliverables? And how are you going to measure at the end of the financial year what you've really accomplished in terms of the plans that you had to accomplish those things? But our people are already talking to us, Dr. Andre. Our people are talking to us, Simeon and Delbert. They're telling us, listen, we can't pay our bills. The young people are talking, they're sending videos.
Of course they're talking, and they should talk. And they should not just talk, but they should again join hats and hands with those who are trying to forge a broad umbrella of unity, a tapestry of love, a tapestry of dedication, a tapestry of devotion to the cause of good governance. I heard Athi Mate, very eloquent, very knowledgeable, speak about the shortcomings of this geothermal energy initiative, its proximity to the village of Lodar and so on, why certain governments have adopted a hands-off approach to this initiative, why after so many years of promise, this thing is still not on stream. At the appropriate time, there should be an investigation whether this was a bona fide effort to produce geothermal energy or just another money laundering scheme. That is what, I've heard knowledgeable persons talk about wind energy, talk about solar energy, much cheaper, and certainly probably of greater benefit to Dominica than this long not labor intensive, finance intensive initiative that seems to have no end in sight. This is a conversation we should have because, again, it's Dominican resources yet again. It's another foreign company yet again. It's another failure yet again. It will be as successful as that plant, the butchery, to sell chickens for Dominicans at less the cost of what you can buy, Mr. G, at Whitchurch or wherever. So this is a conversation Dominica should have because it's another piece of evidence that, as the fighter panelists have said, the whole question of governance doesn't exist in Dominica today. Nothing is being done for the benefit of Dominicans as a whole, as opposed to just a few. Therein lies the problem.
Yes, anybody can jump in now. Let's go a little bit.
Mr. G, one of the problems that we have in our governance system in Dominica is that we keep getting into bad deals, right? We keep getting into bad deals, and it is because of what Mr. Simeon Joseph outlined earlier. It's because we don't understand the role and the function of governance. We have this top-down approach by people who are not technocrats and who are not administrators in the sector, and they give us information and they choose to make deals, sometimes against the advice of the technocrats. And we end up in bad deals. We spend a lot of money and we don't have any success parameters. We don't have any successes to show for the amount of money that we've spent and how we're going to achieve the returns on Dominica's money, Dominica's resources that we keep expending. Not that all of the ideas that we have are bad ideas, but you can use a good thing and implement it so horribly that it becomes the worst thing that you've ever done. And we are now living in some of these situations. The geothermal is one I don't understand. Good idea, very good system, but why is it taking so long? What are the hurdles that have kept us spending so much money, and yet still we don't have anything to show for it? And now we've taken it, what is supposed to be a transformative gesture in Dominica's development, much like the international airport, and we've handed it over to someone else for its usable lifetime. 25 years is a very long time. When we debated this in Parliament, I said the exact same thing. It's a very long time. And what about all of the lifespan of some of the systems within that geothermal plant? Their lifespan is 15 to 30 years. So by the time this is given back to Dominica, we will be doing a brand new overhaul. Will we have the money at that time? Given our current circumstances, are we going to have the money at that time to do it? But not only that, Mr. G, we now have to do the second leg of it because the company is only doing the power plant. We have to do the transmission lines. We have to do the substations. We have to do all of those things. That effort is going to cost a lot more money than the power plant itself, because we're going cross country through the mountains to get those transmission lines down. It's a lot of work. Not a bad idea, a very good system if it works, if it is implemented properly. The timeliness of it. Are we putting all of our eggs into this one geothermal basket? Could we have been exploring wind and solar at the same time, simultaneously, spreading our investments to ensure that if we have another Hurricane Maria situation and everything is not lined up yet, then we're not left as sitting ducks economically? How are we? And that is because, and it goes back to our system of governance and understanding the role and function of government. And understanding that the government cannot be the public sector cannot be your engine of growth. You have to rely on the people who know better than you do and take their advice, right? And that is why, I mean, it is very, very frightening, because what we're seeing now economically and financially in Dominica, it's scary, because now you're seeing we have dogs in the race and we don't know if we're going to finish, because we have an uncertain CBI program that, you know, like the Prime Minister said recently, he wanted to wean us off of that. It doesn't take you 24 years to wean anything, but he wanted to wean us off of that. I guess as an indication now that he recognizes it would always have gone away. But yet, only a few years ago, their campaign slogan was, if not CBI, what? Well, if not CBI, every other thing that we needed to grow sustainably that could sustain itself in Dominica. And that's it. That's the amateur political conversation that this administration forced onto the people of Dominica, that has ruined our ability to communicate effectively and hold our government and our governors responsible for their role and function as government. I would like to suggest that, I don't know how, either Global View on Q together with Mr. G, maybe we can raise some funds with Matt. I remember participating in a youth in governance training that was funded and hosted by the United Nations program for youth in governance. I listening to Mr. Simeon Joseph speak tonight, I would like to suggest that he can develop a program similar that will help to correct our thinking on what governance should be like, because people, young people, even older ones too, need that type of education. I don't know if he's, well, I know he's probably not in the public service anymore, but if we can some way to give young people, because I've been taking notes from what he has been saying, because this is important. Because when you see the breakdown of the governance structure, you recognize how we end up in this quagmire with a bunch of people that just grabbing for themselves, and they're forgetting, hey, you have to leave a future. There are babies being born right now that need a Dominica to live in 15 years from now. You can't just grab it and leave. And you yourself have to retire here too. There must be a place for you to retire. But it starts with our governance, and it starts with holding our government responsible.
So here's the thing, Simeon. You know, if not passports, then what? But I mean, the passports, it yielded billions of dollars. The question is not if not passport, then what? If you go into sell passports, bring the money into the treasury and develop the country, develop your agriculture, develop your tourism, you develop your manufacturing, develop your processing, develop your knowledge industries. So you have to develop all those major pillars of your economy, so that when the passport revenue dries up, as it appears that is, you would have had a very strong, very well structured economy already going. So you would not necessarily need it, because it was always known that this thing was not going to last forever. But the point is that even when you think about this whole thing, you wonder whether that is not deliberate, because I mean, you can see all the time that is happening, our GDP is an all-time low, compared to the rest of the region. Our national debt is just keeps rising. Our debt to GDP ratio is terrible. How you expect to develop a country that way? And you tell me agriculture is a has-been industry in the meantime, and you do absolutely nothing to bring the revenue back. And today you're telling us, when people they've crunched the numbers and they're saying we have $6.4 something billion, they say, no, we don't have any money, nothing coming in. What is going on? I mean, these Dominicans are not stupid. I mean, why can somebody, don't we have a financial secretary or somebody who's supposed to be accountable to say to the people, here is a report. This is the number of passports sold. This is the amount of revenue that it yielded. These are the projects that were done locally from it, costing so much. And therefore, this other money is still there somewhere. We need to get it back in here. If there's no other money, well, tell us, show us the figures so we can justify that argument. But I mean, for God's sake, don't just tell me that you just sit down there, do nothing, you don't. And when in fact the Prime Minister said, when the FS will come and give a report, they will laugh at Linton because they will show that he didn't know. Well, let them laugh. Let the FS do the work. That's what the FS is there for, to do the work. Simeon, before I let you start there, let me just make a reference to something, because we had a passing comment on Brian Linton thing. What I want to say is that I hope it is not just another one of those things where For the next 7 years, Brian Linton will be going to court every month or every couple of months and be just postponing, as has been the case with several other leaders in the opposition. For 7 years now, they go into court, and for some reason, their case cannot be heard because obviously the charges are not evidence-based and they cannot produce the evidence to do it. Is that another case where Brian Linton, again, I'm not even sure what is the outcome of his detention today. We certainly hope we can hear something more tomorrow. But I mean, somebody sent me this quote, and let me just read it, Simeon. They said, once a government is committed to the principle of silencing the voice of opposition, there's only one way to go, and that is down the path of increasingly repressive measures until it becomes a source of terror to all its citizens and creates a country where everyone lives in fear. I don't know what your thoughts are on this comment.
Many, in the sense that, we have a government that has somehow established itself on the altar of lack of accountability. They feel that they owe no one any explanation. They need no reason to act. That as far as they are concerned, they are the be it all and the end all of everything that exists. And again, it brings me back. I must focus on governance because you see, at the heart of all what we're speaking about is who the people have elected and voted for to manage the country and to administer them. We're talking about Brian Linton tonight, but isn't one of the functions of government to resolve conflicts? And where does that come from? In any constitutional democracy, one of the major functions of government is mediation and arbitration and adjudication of certain things that have to do with the state. And this is one of the key functions of government. And so if the government decides that it must, surrender those three main functions of conflict resolution in the state to the law, to the interpretation that you can misapply the law to people according to how you want. That's the brink of dictatorship. And that transitions into some of the causes for stability or instability in our government. Okay? And giving us, for instance, a constant state of flux, and also leading to very unstable political systems. Because you see, one of the things that I'm afraid of in all of this is that the government, in its attempt to cause or its attempt to defer what they wish not to happen, and that is a change in political system, is more and more propelling the organizations and the people of Dominica towards forcing that change in political system. If you understand, again, governance. Because you see, one of the functions of government, a good government, right, is to usher in a certain level of development and change in the political system as the years progress. And that is something that people in politics and government has always have to grapple with, because society is always in a process of growth and decay and breakdown and fermentation and adaptation and adjustment. That's where the government comes in. That as the society goes through that process of change in the system, how does the government assist society in ushering in a certain level of stability in coping with these mechanisms, or creating a level of instability? That's the version where we are now. Because as we transition, our government is less involved in helping our country and our people to navigate through those fermentations and adaptations that are taking place, to create a certain level of stability so that people can identify the factors that can lead to their contemporary development, their growth, etc. So what they are doing instead, they are creating an atmosphere for instability. And there's no doubt about it. Because in modern times, a great majority of the world political systems have experienced some form of internal warfare leading to violent collapse of the government or certain crisis situations that lead to certain kinds of breakdowns and situations. And so unstable political systems will prove vulnerable to crisis and create a certain kind of pressure that will break down, mark my words, it will break down into various forms of internal warfare, one way or the other. You cannot avoid that. Because if the government doesn't create stability because of what is taking place, you will create that for that kind of, and so the fundamental cause of such failure will be that widespread lack of legitimacy and state authority that we are now seeing, and a very prominent absence of general agreement or some kind of appropriate form of political action that should take place. The government is at war with everybody now. There is no political agreement. The government is at war with the private sector. The government is at war with political organizations. The government is at war with trade unions. The government was at war with its own public servants. The government is at war with its police service, its nursing association, its its civic organizations. And that is a dangerous place to be. And so in the absence of that general agreement, we are not going to get that kind of appropriate political action that's going to create the kind of stability that Dominica needs for us to move forward. I believe governments suffer the greatest handicap, okay, when they govern without the consent and when the legitimacy of any regime is questioned, because it creates instability on both sides. As long as the governments feel that they are not valid, and that is where I think the government is now. They know that they are not popular. They feel insecure. They are very defensive. And their defensiveness is leading to a certain level of aggression. That's where we are now. Because without stable political systems, and as a Dominican, as a former public servant, as somebody who has experienced politics in Dominica over the ages, I think we are on the cusp of Dominica of a redefinition of a political system that will create a certain crisis of internal warfare that we may not survive of. Make no mistake about it. I'm afraid that if this government changes tomorrow by the ballot, there may be remnants of aggression of their supporters who will not give the successive government a chance to govern. There might be elements in the police force who might become so insecure that they may lead to a wing of terrorizing whoever comes in to create order and stability. There might be insecure businessmen and strong supporters of the government who will never allow any successive government to have the light of day to govern effectively. These are precarious times that we have to look at. And so the government, to my mind, as much as they are avoiding that kind of political change and revolution in some form or the other, they are, to my mind, moving away from the possibility of us having some stable political system, because there are different types of political change. And anybody knows that political change is a difficult process, and it occurs in different forms and in different ways and in different points in the political system. First, there's radical revolution, and the radical revolution perhaps is the most fundamental type, where transformation takes place not only of the structure of government, but of the whole polity. That we don't want. That is what we may have to. Because our system of government is so undermined now, it leads me to believe that maybe when another government takes over, you may have to ask every permanent secretary to take leave. Every financial secretary, the cabinet secretaries, every government personnel to say, clear out of the way so that we can have a clean slate. Is that what we want? Is that what we want? Do we have to break down every system that exists now to ensure that we have good governance? But that is something that a catastrophe that we do, because it would suspend many things. There is also structural revision, which, God forbid, if there's a change in government tomorrow, I pity the next prime minister and the next cabinet of ministers. I pity them. I'm just fearful that some of them may not get heart attacks on day one in their job, because the humongous task they're going to have to revise and review the type of government and governance that we have now and the kind of political system that has been so established in our society, that the political outcome would have to have a major shift in policy. How are they going to do that? I don't know. Anybody who understands government well will tell you that. Not only that, what is even frightening is that, there are governmental appointees, there are officials of government, and there are state appointees. And that is where the frightening thing comes up. The DPP, Director of Public Prosecution, the Director of Audit, the Chief Elections Officer, the police, these are state appointed custodians of good governance. Look at what's happening. Yes, there is the governmental part. There are the public officers who hold public offices that perhaps you may have to, say, well, you can be reformed. But what about the state appointed whose authority is vested in the Constitution and how they are operating? Look at how the chief of police is operating. Look at how the director of population, the public prosecutor, director of all the permanent secretaries, the cabinet secretary, the financial secretary. Look at how they are operating. In the days of Eugenia Charles and Patrick John and Edison James, and so they could hold their stead and say, no, Mr. Minister, no, Mr. Prime Minister, that ought not be. This is not how things are to operate. I am not your servant. I'm a servant of the state, and the Constitution provides that this is how I do my job. That is no longer there. And so this a kind of structural revision, that is it. So when you look at that thing, it has major implications. Or change of leaders. As we saw in 79, we had a bunch of ministers resigning and pledging allegiance to change a leader. And Mark, the leader that was there said 2 years ago, he's only there for 2 years. I want to see if he'll be gone this year. Because when he changed his slate of ministers and he brought in all the young people, he said he's doing it so that he can move aside. Is he preparing for some incumbency? How is he doing it? Or change of policies? Either how you look at it. What this current regime is trying to avoid the most is what we, Dominica, and them are going to have to face and confront the most. Because when you look at all of those things, that's why it's the total lack of accountability that is at stake. Just to look at the geothermal project and the passports has been mentioned tonight. There are young people in Dominica who were born after the geothermal project started. And today they are midway through secondary school, 3rd form and 4th form. They have gone to primary school, preschool, halfway through secondary school, and they haven't experienced geothermal project or energy yet. And Delbert, Mr. Paris, gave a good analogy. It is not just the construction of that geothermal plant. What about the ancillary expenditures that are going to come after to bring this geothermal plant to the people? And the good point, the burden that these young people are going to have to inherit, because it has to be sold to Domlec, who has to sell it to people. We complained about Domlec now. So that is the question. Now the question I have to ask is, how did this geothermal project come about? Was it as a result of consultation with Domlec and a complete review of the needs of how you call it, energy needs in Dominica? The first climate resilient country. Barbados and Antigua has more solar farms than Dominica. The entire east coast of Dominica is a place for harnessing wind. A number of wind turbines on the east coast of Dominica would be enough to generate electricity if we say we wanted to invest. And that is the link to the Passport Economic Citizenship Program. If the financial secretary, who is responsible for the public purse, and the cabinet secretary had met with their other permanent secretaries and technocrats in each ministry and analyzed the total income that would be derived from the sale of passports to come up with a national plan for the distribution of the income from those passport earnings, Dominica would be better off. It means we would have investments in agriculture. We'd have investment in entrepreneurism. We'd have investment in small industries. We'd have investment in fisheries. We'd have investment in tourism. We'd have investment in a hotel and tourism school in Dominica. We'd have investment in sports, in culture, because why? The public servants who are responsible for the driving of government policy would have been at the forefront of the development of the plans for the utilization of the financial resources in order that government would develop policies for the use of the income of our very own passports. It wasn't done that way.
Right.
It wasn't done that way. And so we have development in reverse. And again, that is where personally I hold cabinet secretaries, financial secretaries, and the permanent secretaries responsible and accountable for the type of government we have today. Mr. Greg, well, let me just end by giving you an example. I don't know if you remember, but in the 1980s, Eugenia Charles wanted to change the status of permanent secretaries. In those days, we had people like Mr. Kenneth Richards, Mr. Doc Trove, and a few people of these, you know. And you know what they did? They had a meeting, and they confronted her. They told her, you cannot do that. She was the prime minister. The cabinet of ministers decided they were going to re-examine the appointment, positioning, and tenure of permanent secretaries. Most of them, I recall, were Freedomites. If I recall in those days, most of them were Freedomites. I knew these people personally. When I got my induction into the public services, and some of the people who inducted me into the public service, so I knew their positions. But in spite of the fact that they were Freedomites, in spite of the fact that they held Miss Charles in high esteem, they confronted her. They had a meeting and they summoned her to a meeting. And they placed before her proposal and they presented to her why it will not work and why they, as the body of permanent secretaries, would not stand for it. And that was dashed aside. That's how the public service is supposed to operate. When the custodians of the Constitution and the public service realize that the political directorate is digressing and diverting away from how government should function, it is their responsibility to hold them to order. And so we have a very, how you call it now, wasteful situation now where our passports have been sold. We don't know how many. We don't know to who. And I think it's a sad state, because had this thing been done the proper way, we would have a hotel and tourism school in Dominica. We would have a cultural center in Dominica. There maybe would be basketball courts all around Dominica and proper playing fields. There would have been an Olympic swimming pool and an athletic track field. There would have been a grapefruit or citrus manufacturing juice plant. There would have been furniture industries. We would have a trawler that would export our fish and even a boat to take our products overseas. We would have been able to establish trade and diplomatic missions in some of the major cities in the world to promote Dominica. We would have been able to invest maybe in the halftime of the Super Bowl a 2-minute ad to promote Dominica to the United States and the world, or we would be able to put some money aside for the Minister of Tourism to advertise Dominica at every major sporting and entertainment event just by allocating money for that. we would have many things done, right? We'd have a major technical school. And these are just some of the possibilities that we would have a national agricultural training station for our young people. Okay? We could have reformed our prison system, move it from the stock farm, take it somewhere else, construct a facility where our prisoners would be trained properly in the right form. We would have a national sports training academy somewhere in Bells or somewhere in the middle of Dominica, proper structure, bought maybe bought over the House of Venus guest house in thing, and have a training camp where our budding sports artists and sportsmen could go and camp and get a certain supplemental income so they could train to represent Dominica. You see the possibilities? When those who are charged with the responsibility of coming up with programs and plans are given the opportunity to present it to government so that people can develop, so that the country can grow, so that you will usher in that kind of stable. That is how you get a stable political system.
Now, Simeon,
not by empowering your police to harass and intimidate.
Yeah, let me just say this, Simeon. You know, some of the things that you suggest, some of the things that you're suggesting there, some of those initiatives already started, you know, but they were frittered away. I mean, Dominica, and look at all this manufacturing you talked about, and so on. Some of those firms were there already. They were already producing stuff and exporting, but they're no longer there. Over the last 24 years, so many of them, we have lists and lists of them have disappeared. But I think we should not give up hope. We talk about all these issues there in the system, but I believe we have the ambition to make our country more stable. Then, you know, ambition has to be made of certain stuff. Dominicans have to stand up, and they have to assert themselves with the people's voice. I mean, no politician is as powerful as the power of the people. And we know, for example, that there's some efforts being made at electoral reform, and I want to speak to Dr. Andre about that before we leave there. Some efforts have been made to get electoral reform in order to get the playing field leveled off so we can have free and fair elections, in order to get a change of direction, a change of governance. And I keep saying that it is time to put a new government in place. This one has been there too long. Dr. Andre, we saw that there was a National Assembly #1 at the DPSU with a senator from Trinidad. That was fairly successful. We saw an Assembly #2 on the riverbank, in which you had many of the people from the electoral coalition, the Electoral Reform Coalition. They ended up on the platform there speaking, and Senator Delbert Paris was there. And then we saw two electoral commissioners, Wayne James and Hillary Shillingford, on the panel. So this is very encouraging. And we now look to look at plans. We seem to be hearing about plans for National Assembly #3, which is scheduled to be held in Granby by the Electoral Reform Coalition on 17th March. I'm not sure how far advanced the plans are, but I get a sense that the plans are advanced and the Granby people are receptive. This is all very encouraging. So I would say this, Dr. Andre, as we go, are the opposition forces who are participating in this electoral reform coalition, are they preparing collaboratively for fresh elections under the anticipated new electoral laws to help change Dominica's course after 24 years under one regime? It seems to me that the opposition forces must now collaborate to ensure success at the next election. Because what we are seeing, Dr. Andre, is that the erosion of all of the institutions that support that are the pillars of our democracy. We see what the Electoral Commission. You see what is happening to that. You see the chairman that they have there. We see the other one, which is supposed to provide accountability from the powers that be, from the people in power. There's absolutely nothing happening there. And so we're seeing all these institutions are being eroded, as Simeon was saying, but we have to stop it, because this is not what we want. It's not a system that we want for countries. It's not what the system that the young people want, because there is no hope for them in that system. We've seen it in other countries and it does not work. We saw it in Grenada, or we've seen what's happening in Haiti. There's all kinds of things happening that discourages that kind of political activity. And we do not want that kind of system, that kind of political structure. We just don't want it. And so it seems to me, Dr. Andre, that efforts have to be made now to strengthen that electoral reform coalition to ensure that all hands are on one deck and the people's voice is speaking in one unified, strong, crystal clear voice, which shows the power of the people and saying to this regime in office, we do not want that direction, because listen to our young people, they're complaining. Every day more young people are coming out and complaining. It's not working out for the people. I'm pretty sure that more than half of the people who support the Labour Party, or what used to be the Labour Party, that some people still think it is the same Labour Party of Edward Liebler and Patrick John and all of it. I don't think it is. It seems to me that Labour Party is to be very concerned about poor people. Rosie Douglas, Pierre Charles, all this Labour Party were very concerned about poor people. I do not see that now. What you yourself have recognized, Dr. Andre, and people like Alvin Thomas, they're on Facebook and they're listening and they're making comments on this. They experience some of that because they worked in some of those governments. What is happening now is that one set of people are benefiting. When you talk about one guy taking $30 million, another guy taking $60 million, and whereas people can't afford to buy a breadfruit, come on, let's talk about what we need to do as a people to ensure that we get back on track.
Yeah, well, what we need to do, again, is not rocket science. First of all, it is clear that the directorate will not give meaningful electoral reform. I mean, how much evidence do we need to support this? There's enough evidence that would choke a horse. Look at their reaction to the recommendations from the OAS, CARICOM Secretariat, civic-minded organizations in right here. Look at even the decision to hire this legal expert to come up with reports. They're looking for a recipe that would perpetuate themselves in power, plain and simple. That is the type of electoral reforms that they're interested, nothing else. Nothing which will level the playing field. They have absolutely no intention and no desire, irrespective of what the acolytes say to you. Any objective analysis of those proposals will suggest that what they're looking for is a recipe that provides loopholes for the perpetuation of themselves in power, plain and simple. And therefore, the work of the organization you just referred to is even more imperative. Therefore, there is a dire and crying need to join hats and hands and encourage these folk and to assist them financially and otherwise in spreading that gospel of a level playing field of free and fair elections in Dominica, because it is the very cornerstone of the rule of law. And we have seen modest steps taken in that direction. But then again, one hot day does not a summer make. We cannot wait for the next 4 months to have a similar initiative. And I'm happy to hear that the organization you referred to is having some type of session on or about March the 17th in Grand Bay. Dominicans have to be sensitized that everything starts and stops with electoral reform, because it's electoral reform, or should I say the absence of it, that has led to the perpetuation of everything negative in Dominica. The displacement of local workers, the frittering away of Dominican resources, the enrichment of foreigners at the expense of Dominicans, the perversion of all the instruments of good governance. All of them stem ultimately from the lack of electoral reform. And let us get one thing out of the way. Nobody's going to give you meaningful electoral reform. You have to agitate for it. You have to. What more proof do you need that it will not be given to you on a silver platter with gloved hands? On the contrary, the administration has shown that they have absolutely no interest in meaningful electoral reform. And that is why we have to play our limited role in bringing and unifying the forces, all of which have one central goal: the restoration of meaningful democracy in Dominica. Thanks.
Yes, and thanks for that. And Delroy, as I go to, because if we're coming to the end of it and we're now ready to make our final closing remarks, but certainly I'm thinking that this initiative that is coming up, which is the third National Assembly, I think it should be fully supported by all of the opposition forces, all the civic organizations, all the political parties, the churches, the unions. Everybody should support this. And I think Dominicans at home, in the region and abroad, globally, should see what they can do to put in their 2 cents to provide financial support for this, to ensure that it is properly funded and that it will be successful. It would be nice to see a couple thousand people in Granby on the 17th and being addressed by all of the various leaders of all of the various organizations and entities that really have the best interest of Dominica at heart. Be up there in Granby and let the people of Granby, in fact, take the platform and to state the dissatisfaction with what is going on, and they would like to see, because Granby, as you know, is one of the bedrocks of the Labour Party. People like Pierre Charles and Rosie Douglas ensured that was the case. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Delbert, and I'm really hoping that you will be again invited to be on that platform, because you represent the youth. And it seems to me that the things that you say are going to make a difference to the youth. It's going to impact the thinking of the youth. You say, if Delroy can think that way, if Delroy can be doing this, I can do it too. All right. So let's talk about this a little bit as you make your final closing remarks.
Yeah, Mr. G. I don't have all the details of the additional National Assembly, but I'm ready to serve. I'm ready to serve, and I am just a representative of what young people are saying. I happen to be brave enough to speak about it nationally and to answer when I'm called. That's how I was trained by my parents. But I'm not unique. There are a lot of young people like me who can express the same issues like me. I think what they need is to know that they have a partner in the resistance, and people care about them enough and care about their issues enough to make it important and to actually do something and to recognize their efforts. Because you see, Mr. G, a lot of the times young people are criticized for their lack of attention, for their willingness to always be attracted to party and shiny things. And while that may have some merit to it, a lot of the time the potential of the young people are ignored. And often when it pops up, we give it a little bit of shine, and the young people know when we're faking. The young people know when we're not genuine. The young people know when we want to use them as a pass, or to placate to them, or to use them for their numbers and their energy. They know, they can read, they can see it from a mile away. But real, genuine partnership with young people is meaningful. It goes a long way. And I'm happy to always serve. I'm happy to represent them. I am one of them. I am them. They are me. We are all the same. There's no difference. But we all deserve to live in a free and liberated Dominica. Mr. Simeon Joseph outlined a very scary sequence of potential events a while ago. I see some people mentioning in the comments that it is very frightening, but it's something that we should take seriously. It is something that we should pay attention to, because just burying our heads in the sand will not make it go away. Burying our heads in the sand and pretending that it won't happen won't make it go away. And that's what we've seen our government continuously do. Ignore the people, ignore their cry, ignore their pleas, ignore their issues, turn a blind eye to it, just ignore it and pretend as if it will go away, but it will explode into something that is uncontrollable. And that is why I've heard many leaders that I am associated with, and including people like my father, say, hey, we have to try to evaluate and use and espouse all the avenues of civilized discourse, of justice, of just approach to democracy, to regaining our democracy and reclaiming our country before it gets to violence. What Mr. Simeon Joseph explained a while ago is what will happen if those voices and those civilized pleas for justice is ignored. It will happen. It will happen. And what we have to recognize is that we must do something, and do something about it now. Mr. G, there's so much to talk about. It's almost 10:30. We're out of time. I didn't get a chance to talk about my contractors and my truck drivers and the people in the construction sector. I was in a forum today with a bunch of truck drivers and heavy equipment operators. And I mean, these are the hardest working people in our island. And these are the people who are suffering the most. These are the people who are suffering the most. In the budget that we recently passed, in the selected data, and I encourage everybody, the budget is online. Everybody can Google it. It's on the government website. You can go on it. There's a page called selected data. In that page, Mr. G, I just want to point out something. In a year where we started an international airport, we've had so much buildings done and so on and so forth, and so much activity in the construction sector. One of the areas of growth, let me just call it out for you here right now, if I can pull it up. Under the section, rate of growth of GDP by economic activity at basic prices, the construction sector declined by almost 3%, by 2.79%. In a year when we're having all that construction activity, we're showing decline. That is not my data. This is the government's data. The people are suffering. And when your hardest working people, your farmers, your agricultural entrepreneurs, your contractors, and all of the people in the construction sector, your truck drivers, your heavy equipment operators, when they are suffering, Mr. G, it will not go unnoticed. There's a call for a government of transitional, a unity government of transitional unity. That is who might have to take over in the transition, Mr. Joseph. That they will be the ones that may need to help establish real proper electoral reform. They might be the ones to help us find whatever monies that are due to Dominica that is not there. They might be the ones to help us do a lot of the analysis and research to get Dominica, at the very least, pointed in the right directions, and where we can have elections on a level playing field, pointed in the right direction for a future for Dominica. And at last, people can be free, and the burden can come off of our back, and we can start getting prepared to live in a free and liberated Dominica, where we can say that this is the best place to live and the best place to work and to enjoy life in the country of our birth. Mr. G, I hope I did this justice. I learned a lot. This was an educational session for me. Thanks for having me on. And wherever the call is to serve in the betterment of my people, I'm always available. Thank you.
Senator Delbert Paris, I think you used your time here tonight very wisely. And I think you will find many of the comments that will be made and that will come back to you later will confirm what I have said. And I think we should come back to talk about those hardworking people in those sectors that you're referring to, because after all of what we're saying is really for the people of Dominica, the best interest of the people of Dominica. Things are not going that way now. But it seems to me the interest of foreigners is being served over and above the interest of Dominicans. We need to come back, and I'm certainly sure that we will come back and look at that. But Simeon, it seems to me that what Senator Delbert Paris was saying is that the youth are taking notice. I mean, come on, don't tell me that the young people who are getting this, what you call scholarships, and they're going out there and they're very talented. I mean, people can say young people are easy, but I mean, there's a lot of talented and creative Dominicans in Dominica and outside of Dominica. They're going out there and they put their hearts in it. They're doing very well at those schools, and their fees are not being paid. Yes, they bring them a ticket to come down and vote. But then when they have to write the exam, the school is telling them that your fees are not yet paid. You cannot write. If you have to write your exam, you will not get your results until your fees are paid. Come on, don't tell me you have to embarrass your young people like that. And then after they get when they graduate and they come back, you don't even have opportunity for them to work because the government has taken over the growth engine and they cannot employ everybody, and you have not empowered your private sector through an enabling policy environment that can produce growth. How is the private sector going to survive when you tell your local banks that they have to provide guarantees for foreign companies that are wealthy, when in fact that money should be used to empower your local entrepreneurs? Look at how many young women and men in processing and are doing all kind of things, from using the local raw materials and creating sensational products that could do well on the international market. Because all of a sudden, what you call these power products, and now all of the products that we're producing in Dominica naturally You know, so Simeon, as you close, let me put your thoughts on one or two of those things as we close.
Okay, well, first I'd like to say, you know, in all of this, I always pray that the Prime Minister would bend his heart. You know, it's never too late for somebody to bend their heart, you know, and that's all I'll say for that. But to end tonight, Mr. Gregoire, and what we've been talking about, all I want to say is we need to underscore our understanding and widen our perspective of the appreciation that the crux of government's responsibility is to protect people's rights and to enable them to pursue their interests. That's why government exists. And that in our current situation, a realization that when you have limited government, that unleashes prosperity. When government steps back, stands aside, and allow itself to be an empowering force for people, prosperity unleashes in every sector. And the concept of limited government is not simple. A limited, just government takes upon the responsibility to protect the rights to life, to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to use that term. These rights are self-evident beyond debate, not a question for debate. And so the government's proper role is limited to protecting these rights of people. When a government thinks that it is tempted to encroach on freedom, and without vigilance, this encroachment occurs over time and in slow, convincing steps. What happens is it leaves individuals to care for themselves and carve their own plans for their own happiness. A system of limited government, and that's what I want to focus on, a system because we have a government that is overarching, that is dominant, that is pervasive, right? A system of limited government can lift people from poverty because it allows people to thrive. It empowers them. And it restores the relational parts of society to where it belongs, with people and not government programs. I want to end with a quote from James Madison, one of the founders of the American Society. And he said, if we tell government that its principal role is to take care of us, there will be no end to the violation of rights. Let's just think about that. If we tell a government, and that's what Dominicans have been doing, if we tell a government that its principal role is to take care of us, there will be no end to the violation of rights. And that's something that we need to consider. Perhaps we have allowed our government to be too much in charge of us. And the fact that they are in charge of us, they think they can do what they want with us.
Well, you know, Simeon, part of the problem too, which aggravates that, is that when they take that role, when they usurp the role of the engine of growth, and they feel that they're in charge of us, the problem is that they exercise that authority in a way that it only reaches some of the people who support them. That is part of the big problem.
And the bedrock, of course, the bedrock for injustice.
That's correct. And in terms of taking over the engine of growth, they empower a select few businesses that can, you know, create some kind of perception that things are going well. And the majority of the business, especially the local businesses, are getting the wrong, they're holding the wrong end of the stick. So I think, Dr. Andre, as we close, that we should not be too worried. We should be conscious of the fact that there are possibilities of all kinds of concerns that Simeon raised about the structure and about the system. But I think we, who mean well, and many Dominicans, the majority of Dominicans mean well, I think we should together take a decision that we are not going to have the option, some of the other options, that the one option we want to choose, if we want to go the way of democracy, to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. If we want to go that way, then we're going to have to take a decision and let our voices be heard. And it's a good start. I mean, you've made a good start in Assembly number 1, Assembly 2. There's one coming up at Granby. Dominicans, let your voices be heard. Go up there. Let your voices be heard in Granby. Remember, Granby is one of the communities where the popular independence movement spurned. And Granby, I mean, I showed the way. I mean, remember when they had a big landowner up there who they were not happy with, and then they say, okay, no, that can't happen. We want to shove that pie. They got a piece of the estate. Granby has always been out there in the forefront of those movements. And therefore, we expect Granby to show up again, because I think Granby has been dealt a terrible blow by putting a representative there who really had no interest in that community. And it shows. And we have seen nothing happen there. And the Granby people now, I think, deserve better. And they believe they deserve better. And I think they're going to look to do better. So it seems to me that it's a good move for the Electoral Reform Coalition to have a National Assembly in Granby, so that the voices of the Granby people can be heard loud and clear to this regime that, listen, we matter too. No se mon too, Dr. Andre.
You're absolutely correct. But let me say, let not your heart be troubled. Dominicans do not need any inspiration for aspiring to unify the forces to bring about meaningful change. After all, as one government minister said, we are last in the Caribbean in virtually every aspect or index of development. After all, you have over $120 million in IPOs not being paid. After all, you have NEP workers quiet, but not paid for months. After all, you have truck drivers who haven't been paid, but again, they haven't discovered their inner strength. They're quiet, although apparently they had a meeting today, at least some of them, and so on. After all, you have persons who have been denied employment. After all, you have businesses that have closed down. After all, you have persons, quite frankly, who cannot speak or choose not to speak because of fear of victimization. But there is always hope. There is always hope. And this is the time when the Lenten season, when we reflect on life, we reflect on the sacrifices made by the Father, and we reflect on the sacrifices made by our community. And we should take inspiration, those of us who do not want to take inspiration from those sad developments in Dominica's history. We can take inspiration from various sections of the Bible. You can start with Acts 2:42 to 47, which says, quote, they shared their food, clothing, and other possessions as every man may need, not every man wearing a red shirt. In Ecclesiastes 4:12, it says here, a threefold cord is not quickly broken. A unified force is not easily defeated. In Peter verses 3-8, you have, be ye all of one mind. Have compassion one another. Love as brethren. Be pitiful and courteous. Not tell people go throw water on anyone who approaches your house. In Psalms 133, and you may have heard reference to that one in a song by Bob Marley, appropriately called African Unity, it says, behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And lastly, in Corinthians verse 12 to 27, it says, for as the body is one and hath many members, and all the members are of that body, being many are one body, so also is the heavenly Father. So there is no end of inspiration for us to do the right thing. And if not now, then when? When our hands are bound behind our backs, when there is no one to come assistant, to come to our assistance when the resources not only of the state, of the people have been squirreled away into mysterious accounts. Rise, Dominica, rise. Show your leadership. Rise. Thank you very much.
And thank you so much, Dr. Andre. And I want to thank also all of the folks who are still with us on Facebook and on YouTube and on many other platforms all over. I mean, so it's so happy to have you with us tonight. I'm sorry I neglected to sort of acknowledge you a little earlier and to read some of your comments, but I'm sure you'll forgive me for that, because you can see the gentlemen I have here, this illustrious panel. They had so much to say. I myself, just like you, had to just sit there and learn. So I want to thank you, Simeon Joseph, our illustrious social scientist. And I want to thank Senator Delbert Paris. I think I look forward to seeing a lot more of you in public service. You're off to a very good start. The circumstances that brought you in, maybe it was some divine circumstances, but really and truly, I'm happy that you're here and that you intend to continue in public service. And of course, to Dr. Justice Irving Andre, you've been fighting for Dominica for so long. I hope that you'll be able to continue the good fight. That, as Delbert Paris said, you're still very young. You still have a long way to go. Please continue to fight in the good fight. So let me just say good night, everybody. Good night, Lambi. Good night, Sherwin. Good night, Simeon and Delbert and Dr. Andre. All of our folks on Facebook and YouTube and, on all of the platforms listening all over the globe, listening to Q95 at www.q95da.com. Tune in, Radio Garden, all of those. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And let me just promise you that we will come back to discuss your favorite people, because these are people at the backbone. That is what this is all about, We can talk about all elect reform and all election, but it's in fact to come back to the people's life, the quality of life, right? And so it seems to me that we have to come back to that. So I promise you, I will call you for us to come back. And I think we should have Simeon with us when we do that as well. Maybe we'll have the same panel, and maybe you might want to introduce somebody else. But the fact of the matter is, somebody has to look after the people's interests, because right now, all we're hearing is money being repatriated, 200-something million going outside from foreigners, and we're not hearing what Dominicans are getting out of all these billions of dollars of our passport money. That cannot be right. Our farmers still balling, our young people still balling. It cannot be right. Something has to be done about it, and I hope this regime will pay some attention to that. But most of all, I hope all of the well-meaning opposition forces, all the civic organizations, the political parties, the unions, the churches and everything, private sector, I hope they will come together and decide, something, enough is enough. We need to do something about this to put us back on track. So good night, everybody. Till next time, have a good one. Take care.
Okay.
Care.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, 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 no. Oh, no, 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 no. Looking out my window, and I'm a thinking of tomorrow.